Ethan Grady was just fixing his ranch fence when a group of fake HOA cops tried to seize his land under fabricated authority. Their smug threats and counterfeit badges turned a quiet afternoon into a hostile standoff that reeked of abuse and power games. But the moment Ethan revealed his true identity as State Fire Marshal, the entire balance shifted in one heartbeat. And just wait until you hear how this confrontation ended, and why real justice left those imposters face down in the dirt. The late afternoon sun dipped low over the Wyoming plains as Ethan Grady tightened the last board on his weathered ranch fence. It was the kind of quiet only open land could hold. Just wind in the grass and the steady rhythm of a hammer. He valued days like this, away from sirens and reports, where the world felt steady under his boots. That peace shattered in seconds. A black SUV came roaring up the dirt road, tires spitting gravel, red and blue lights flashing across the dry field. Ethan straightened slowly, grip tightening on the hammer as the vehicle skidded to a stop 10 feet from his fence line. The driver's door slammed open, and a heavy-set man in a dark uniform stepped out. Across his chest was a patch that read HOA Enforcement. His voice cut the air like a command. "You can't build that fence without HOA approval." Ethan blinked once, calm but firm. "This is my land. There's no HOA here." The man's lips curled into a knowing smirk, like someone who'd already decided the outcome. He lifted a radio to his mouth and spoke into it with mechanical precision. "Code 12, requesting backup, property owner resisting compliance." Ethan's gut tightened. That wasn't the language of a neighbor with a complaint. It was the language of a raid. The low growl of engines rose from beyond the hill, and then he saw them, 2 more SUVs cresting the ridge, dust rising in their wake. The hammer in his hand suddenly felt heavier. This wasn't an argument over a fence. It wasn't even a mistake. As the vehicles spread out across his property line, Ethan understood the truth in a single sharp breath. This was no misunderstanding. This was a takeover. Dust still lingered in the air as the other SUVs rolled to a stop, doors slamming in unison like a warning shot. Within minutes, Ethan stood in the center of a tightening circle. 5 men in matching HOA enforcement uniforms fanned out around him, each moving with the cold confidence of people who thought they owned the ground they stood on. The tallest of them, clearly their leader, stepped forward and spoke in a tone stripped of humanity, more declaration than conversation. "You're in violation. We are authorized to remove the fence and detain you until the matter is resolved." Ethan's jaw clenched. His eyes flicked from their boots to the horizon, to the way they glanced at his house, measuring it like property already claimed. It wasn't about a fence. It wasn't about rules. It was about control. Something hot coiled in his chest, a slow, steady burn that made his pulse thrum in his ears. Hatred wasn't an emotion he gave in too often, but this. 5 strangers in counterfeit authority, trespassing on land that had been in his family for generations. This stirred it to life. One of them stepped closer, a pair of zip ties dangling from his hand. Without a word, he reached for Ethan's arm, his face blank, mechanical. That single motion snapped the last thread of patience. Ethan's voice was low, steady, the voice of a man who had faced down real emergencies, real chaos, and didn't bow to counterfeit power. You just made a mistake. The man's hand froze an inch from his sleeve. For the first time, a flicker of uncertainty cracked through the wall of false authority surrounding him. The air between them tightened, charged with the unspoken promise that the balance of power was about to shift. The zip ties glinted in the sun as the man's hand hovered too close to Ethan's arm. In one sharp motion, Ethan stepped back, his fingers going to the worn leather wallet on his belt. The snap of the button breaking open was louder than the wind. He pulled out his credentials and held them up like a shield and a blade at once, his voice cutting through the tense silence. "State Fire Marshal, you are trespassing on protected state property." For a fraction of a second, the circle broke. Their boots shifted in the dirt, eyes flicking to the emblem stamped in gold. That tiny hesitation was all Ethan needed. He reached for the red radio clipped to his belt, the same one he used when entire counties were on the line. His voice dropped into the calm authority of a man used to commanding chaos. "Unit 4, multiple armed trespassers obstructing emergency operations. Full response. Code priority." The words hit like a switch being thrown. Somewhere beyond the ridge, the land itself seemed to come alive. A distant wail broke the stillness, joined by another. Then another. Sirens, engines, the deep thrum of rotor blades growing louder with each second. Dust rolled over the fence line as fire engines crested the hill in a line of red, followed by sheriff's cruisers fanning out like a shield around his ranch. Above them, the shadow of a helicopter swept across the ground, its spotlight locking on the black SUVs. Ethan lowered the radio and looked each man in the eye. His voice was low, steady, not a threat, just a verdict. "Drop your badges. You're done." The men who had walked onto his land with counterfeit authority now stood frozen in the storm they'd called down, and for the first time their silence sounded like fear. The last rays of sunlight stretched long across the dirt as the scene settled into order. The once proud HOA cops were now face down in the dust, wrists locked in steel cuffs, their fake uniforms smeared with the reality of failure. Deputies moved methodically, prying open the black SUVs. What they found inside told the whole story. Stacks of forged citations, counterfeit badges, and a small arsenal of intimidation tools designed to make honest folks kneel. Sheriff Wilkins stepped through the fading light, his boots crunching on the gravel. He gave one of the impounded SUVs a slow glance and let out a low chuckle. "Hell of a day off, Marshal." Ethan stood by the now straight fence line, his hands resting lightly on the post he'd been driving into the earth before the storm began. He followed the line of cedar slats with his eyes, the simple proof that his land and his authority still stood unbroken. "At least it's standing," he said, his voice even, a thin smile tugging at the corner of his mouth. The last cuff clicked shut somewhere behind him, but Ethan didn't turn to look. Justice wasn't always a roar, wasn't always a headline. More often, it was the quiet exhale at the end of the day, when predators learned that real authority doesn't hide behind plastic badges, and the land itself seemed to breathe easier in their absence.